Hi. Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, senior film writer for Now Magazine, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Jamie M. Dagg, a filmmaker whose first feature, River, starred Racif Sutherland as an American doctor on the run in Laos. His follow-up, Sweet Virginia, is a really satisfying slow burn with John Bernthal and Christopher Abbott as two men on a collision course in a small Alaska town. It's in theaters and on VOD in the US right now, and coming to Canada in the same formulation December 1st. Jamie picked Ron Fricke's Baraka, and I really hope I'm pronouncing Ron Fricke's name right. It's the first time someone's brought a non-narrative project to the podcast, and I was really grateful for the opportunity. Shot all over the planet in 70mm, which was a truly staggering accomplishment then and now when you think about it, it's a compelling look at locations we might never otherwise see, and a stunning meditation on humanity's purpose in the world. Often lumped in with Godfrey Reggio's Qatsi trilogy, which is understandable, since Fricke was Reggio's cinematographer on the first film, Qatsi, Baraka is its own marvelous thing, and I was delighted to be able to sink into it all over again. This is Someone Else's Movie.
Baraka has zero influence on me as a filmmaker, but it had a profound influence on me as a human being.
Okay.
In its exploration of our humanity's relationship with each other and our environment. And it's like this, it's an examination of life that sort of transcends politics, transcends culture, it transcends language, because there's no dialogue in it.
Yeah.
And it really just sort of, it's a visceral sort of experience that just sort of hits you in the gut. Now, it's funny, like, I've gone back and rewatched it, obviously, in preparation for this, and there's some of the music gets a little bit on the new agey side that sort of makes me grit my teeth a bit. But I think it's a visual masterpiece, you know?
Well, what was your first experience of it? Because it's like these films, I mean, you know, Qatsi is the perpetual college movie.
Maybe that's what I should talk about. Like, so when I was in grades, that was my first exposure to Ron Fricke, who directed Baraka, but was the cinematographer on Qatsi.
Yep.
For anybody who doesn't know her. So I was probably in grade 7 or 8, and back when Much Music used to play music videos and stuff, and they used to have this, I think it was called the Big Ticket Special, the Monday, it was like, they used to show films a Monday after school.
Okay.
So I would come home,
remember that.
Instead of like tidying the house or doing dishes, you know, I'd be watching television when waiting for my mother to get back from work. And I still remember this one day, and I think it was like 4:30, and all of a sudden, like, the screen goes black, and all of a sudden you're like, Qatsi, and you see these big, bold, red letters, like, and I was like, it looks like a propaganda film or something, like, and then it opens with those pictographs from this cave in, I don't know, I think it was Utah or something like that, and then it smash cuts to this, like, just plume of flame and smoke and this, like, dropping ice, and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And then you realize that it's like a booster or thruster from a Saturn V rocket, and then you've got pictures of the Grand Canyon, you've got pipelines, and then, like, atomic bomb blasts, and all, like, backed up by this, like, crazy arpeggio hurricane of music from Philip Glass. And I didn't know who Philip Glass was at the time or anything like that. And I remember my mother coming in, you know, this is a woman that's working all day, and she's got 3 kids who are unruly and everything like that, and she just wants to come in and, you know, turn to Channel 5 and watch The Young and the Restless, and there's just this I didn't know what to make of it, you know, because I was only like in grade 7 or 8, and I hadn't, you know, where are the words? You know what I mean? Where's the talking? You know, there's no one's explaining anything to me, but I was still, like, captivated by it.
It would be such a young age to experience non-narrative.
Yeah.
To just be abstracted.
Especially in that particular time, too, where, you know, pre-internet, you know, where you're exposed to anything out there, you know what I mean? Like, and so I didn't, you know, it took me a while. I didn't see it until I was later in high school when I rented the VHS, and I finally saw it in its entirety. without my mother switching the channel. And I wasn't really exposed. I didn't know who he was, and I didn't even know he was the cinematographer of it. But I was friends with Brendan Canning. Mm-hmm. I knew him from in high school because I grew up in a small town in northern Ontario, a place called Timmins.
Oh, yeah.
And I used to, when I was in high school, I used to sell records out of my bedroom, and I'd book shows for different bands and stuff like that. So one of the shows I did was for a band that Brendan was in called Head, with the little H in front of it.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I knew him, and after high school, when I moved to Toronto, like the only friends that I knew in Toronto were like people in bands that I'd done shows for, and I ended up moving in with the singer from his band, this guy Noah Mintz.
Okay.
And they invited me to go on tour with them, so I went. I'd never driven across Canada before, so I thought it was a great opportunity to. And so I went, and that was. They had the Baraka soundtrack, so it was a constant struggle in the van. Like, what do we listen to? And all I wanted to listen to was metal and punk and hardcore stuff, and they wouldn't let it. And they wanted to listen to John Spencer Blues Explosion or whatever, you know. So it would sometimes just settle on Baraka, especially like those late night drives. And the soundtrack really, one particular piece of music that I always would wait for was that this Dagg dance track that's really sort of haunting and. Anyways, long story short, I ended up moving to Australia, and I kept on hearing, everyone would talk about Baraka, and it was showing in 70mm in Sydney, and I had a chance to see it, and it really was a transformative sort of experience.
So how old would you have been at that point? Early 20s?
Oh, yeah, I was probably 20 years old.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was...
so it is like college age. It's exactly when everybody does encounter these films.
But it's still quite a number of years ago. Mm-hmm. Not to date myself here, but it was... and it really had... I guess when you grow up in a place like Timmins, which is pretty much... there's... We're not like King of the Hill, but there was a Laotian family in Timmins, and there's a couple Chinese families, and there's obviously a lot of First Nations and stuff, but it's not like a really multicultural city.
Right.
And so your window to the world pre-internet age is literally National Geographic, And that's what we had. Like that's mega. I still remember just rows and shelves of those yellow National Geographics. My dear mother, she's so funny. She kept them. She's like, "Oh, I've got all those National Geographics for you." He's like, "Mom, I don't have how the hell am I even gonna get those to Toronto?" But bless her heart. But that was like as a kid, I spent hours looking at that stuff, and then they would release like hardcover books with like. Books on the universe and books on, and that was...
I remember those too, like the reference guides.
It's incredible, yeah. And that it doesn't mean anything now because, again, everything is, you got it all right here,
Yeah.
in front of you on your computer or phone or on your phone.
But it is very difficult trying to explain to people the idea. I was describing microfiche to my nieces.
Yeah.
Who are like 16 and 10, and they're like, what?
What
is this world? Because there's I can't even remember what it was, but there's something, maybe it was Stranger Things or It or something. There's a scene with microfiche somewhere, and they were asking.
That's right,
if it's real, and it's like, oh yeah, that was the only way you could learn things.
Yeah, all the newspapers. I should go to the library and see all the archives and stuff. Yeah.
And now it's just incomprehensible to them that you used to have to wait for something, for anything, for information, entertainment, scheduling.
There's an immediacy to everything right now, and it's. So that's to see that film at that time, it really was. It was like a 70mm version of National Geographic.
Sure. Yeah.
And it changed my I decided I'm gonna go to Asia, and I'm gonna go to Nepal, and I'm gonna go to India, and I went and I didn't have dreadlocks, but it was just I just really wanted to. I had no exposure to these cultures other than through the magazines that I'd seen in it. And you have that thirst or that desire to learn about people, you know what I mean, and other and things outside of the small 45,000 person town that you're living in.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's it was really there's so many different facets to it. It's the film itself, but it's also like when you get older and you got into filmmaking, and because I wasn't making films when I was 8 years old or anything. It wasn't something I decided I wanted to do until I was in my 20s.
Okay.
And then you start to get interested. You become interested in the logistics. Like, how do they do this? Like, they shot this. It took them 2.5 years to make the film, and they shot in 14 countries.
with a Todd AO rig that hadn't been used since I think the early 70s.
Yeah, well,
right?
the two cameras they had, the first one, the Todd AO 65 millimeter camera was built by Mitchell, and it was actually made for Patton.
Okay.
They used that on Patton, and then Ron Fricke and his producer Mark Magidson, Ron designed and had this through his producer's company, and they actually like built this camera, and they built that entire motion control system. Like the Todd AO camera they had, that was only the fastest that was like a 72 or 76 frames per second camera. The one that they built had a maximum frame rate of 1 frame a second.
Right, because it's just for time lapse.
And so they built though, and that motion control, which had pan and tilt. You could control the shutter, and you could, depending on the configuration of the track, either dolly or track with it, and lugging all this equipment around. Again, shooting 5x65.
Yeah, no, it's inconceivable to me that you can make a documentary in large format that's not IMAX, and even IMAX is incredibly difficult and challenging.
Absolutely, yeah.
And to mount it in the late 80s, early 90s is doubly nuts.
Yeah, and going to countries too that were really inaccessible. Mm-hmm. You know, like it was like the shooting all that stuff in Cambodia, in Angkor, and other places in and around Phnom Penh. It's like that wasn't an easy test to get permission to go there. There was a civil war where there was like curfews and stuff, and they were shooting at Angkor, and they could hear like shells going and bombs going off in the back and deep in the jungle. And like I went to Cambodia just prior to it opening up. It probably would have been 97.
Okay.
And even then, it was, you know, it's just things so much has changed in these countries. They went to Iran, you know, and that was a tough place to go to at the time.
Yeah, as Americans too.
Yeah,
sure.
And not only is it like as Americans, but we want to bring in these giant cameras and shoot stuff. And it's like
we're sure we're not spies.
Yeah, exactly. And so it seemed like this sort of Herculean like task to even pull this thing off. But on top of that, they created this sort of visual language that up to that time hadn't really, specifically the mixture of time-lapse and motion control. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we've seen so much of it now. Like I often wonder, somebody watching this for the first time, would it have the same sort of impact? You know, because we've all seen like those really elaborate like starfield sequences, the camera moving and all the, you can obviously see the stars creeping across the sky and all that sort of stuff, but no one had done that really, at least to that degree. I don't think anyone had really done it, like that combination of
91. Yeah, probably not. Certainly not in the
not like that, and especially not on 65. You know, and you know, like their producer would stay up all night. It would take them 8 hours to program shots. They had like a 236. I can't remember what brand of computer it was, but it was like completely archaic, like just dedicated to their motion control system, and or 286, not 236. Yeah, what's a 236?
286 is it's just a processor, isn't it?
Yeah. So they had a 286 processor, and it was just this system. And it's really special. Like it's funny. I try not to, you know, to overly intellectualize like what they're trying to say, and you just want to sort of allow it to hit you, you know what I mean? Like it's hard to sort of verbalize, but I think some people spend too much time trying to analyze what they're trying to say and rather just sort of like feel it, you know?
Yeah, I wonder if that isn't because Koyaanisqatsi specifically and Powakatsi have messages, like they're designed to tell, to articulate something, to tell the story that we have to assemble as we watch it. And Baraka, Kronos maybe from the title just had me expecting a process of time. But
Kronos was IMAX, wasn't it?
I think so. I want to say yes. Or it was sufficiently large format.
Yeah, I know it was a large. I know it was a large format.
It must have been.
I think it was IMAX though.
Yeah. But Baraka and Samsara, they just exist really. They're Ebert described them as travelogues that let you contemplate what it is you're seeing, which I think is a really, like, that's the basic format, the basic purpose of travelogue. But it immerses you in a different way than the Katsi trilogy, just because Fricke's not Reggio and he's got a different idea. He's got something else he's pursuing. And they're like spaces for contemplation.
Yeah.
And certainly his fascination with large format means he wants you to just luxuriate in the image, but look at every detail. There's a 5-minute sequence. It's the cover of Samsara, the 5-minute sequence of arm movements of this one incredible dancer.
Yeah.
And you just stare, and you don't really think about what it means. You're not encouraged to. You're just encouraged to analyze, to look at the image, and it's a really unique experience. And I'm more of a Reggio guy.
Yeah.
But even Reggio starts doing what Fricke is doing. His last project, Visitors, is just shots of people's faces.
Really? I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it's gorgeous. This, I want to say 8K. It might have only been 4K, but just high resolution digital image in an anamorphic frame of people staring out of the screen at you. With a Philip Glass score that's supposed to be played live with an orchestra. I saw it at TIFF. I guess it would have been 2013 or 14, and it's just otherworldly. And it brought me back around to
especially with the live. I think that's the sort of thing though you need to see. With the score needs to be performed live.
Yeah, you need the energy of it. It just, I mean, you can DTSX or Dolby Atmos at people, but it really is a different experience when it's happening.
Yeah.
But it brought me back around to what Fricke is doing with static shots and the expanse of time that he uses.
Yeah.
The way that we experience the image that he's put in front of us, which is not what the Qatsi films do. They rush you through the whole world. This is a much more stop and start kind of rhythm.
Mm-hmm. I haven't seen Nakoi Qatsi.
A lot more about mechanization.
Yeah. Like I think Qatsi is a Hopi word that means life, and then there's life out of balance. I think is the word.
That's
wrong.
Yeah, no, that's the first
I know
one.
that Nakoi Qatsi is life at war or something, but I don't know what Powaqatsi is. I don't think I've seen Powaqatsi. Is it Powaqatsi? Right?
Powaqatsi.
Yeah, Powaqatsi. I haven't seen that since it's been 20 years or something.
These films taught me literally how to see the world, or showed me another way to see the world.
What is it? It's like that that interconnectedness that and this is not some like hippy dippy bullshit, because that's not who I am.
Yeah.
But there is, like, we are literally created out of stardust. You know what I mean? Like all the major elements, almost all of them. Almost all of them.
That's how matter works. Absolutely.
Is like came from the heart of stars. You know what I mean? And even on a smaller level, and there's some people that talk about how it's influenced, or it's making a case for deep ecology. I've never studied that, but I think from what I understand, it's sort of the opposite of that sort of anthropocentric type of environmentalism, where everything is just focused around the humans and the impact of the environment on us. And you see that a lot with global warming too, like how it's always framed in a way at how it affects humanity, as if we're the only living species on this planet. You know what I mean? And not to discount, because it's obviously, I'm a human and I don't want to have to see, I think we need to do something about this. And
sure.
And no one wants to see, the migration associated with that will be associated with global warming that's going to transform the world.
I mean, it's happening already.
It's happening already, yeah. And but I think there's a whole bunch of hippie stuff that within deep ecology, and sort of dismissing modern physics in favor of some, I don't know, new agey sort of shit. That's where I start to take an issue with that, because I believe in science, but I do think that we need to start looking at our world in a much more I hate this word too, holistic, but in a much more holistic sort of way.
But in the literal definition of the
in
term.
the literal, yeah. Not this mind body like sort of shit, but like,
Yeah.
you know, we're a single species on this planet that is radically transforming this planet at an astounding rate, much to the detriment of every other form of life here, and it scares the shit out of me. And that's what I think. This doesn't get too much into it, like this film, you know, but it is a part of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, any movie that spends that much time in the natural world and observing people moving through it is going to make you think about the world and the way that it. I mean, even now, it's not the same. Those landscapes, most of those aren't the same as they were 25 years ago. The world has radically changed to the point where this is now not just a documentary, but it's a historical document of what that looked like when the camera was there at that time.
Yeah.
What you were saying about the global perspective, I think people, you know, when you're trying to make a comprehensible argument about climate change, you bring it to people in the you won't be able to live in New York City in 25 years kind of way, as opposed to the world will change, because you have to get the listener to put themselves in there. It's about generating empathy. Mm-hmm. But it's also ridiculous to think we're destroying the world. We're just making ourselves extinct.
Yeah, absolutely.
The world will be fine. The world will just keep on. It will keep on
going on. Well, you can see, like, even they show it in, not to go back to Cambodia again, but you look at, there's one temple, and I can't remember, I think it's Priya Khan is the name of the temple, but they've just allowed it to be completely consumed by the jungle.
Right.
And
that's right. Yes, the reclamation.
Yeah, and we're talking, this is a period, I think that's 12th century. So you look at how much that place has changed in those 800 years, which sounds like a lot, but it's a mere blip in true time, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no.
And it's, I don't really, I'm not worried about the planet, like, in that regard, but I am worried about us as a species, and I'm worried about, more importantly, I'm worried about the sort of world that our children and children's children will inhabit. Like, I've been fortunate, you know, I grew up in a small town. It's not a cultural mecca by any stretch of the imagination, but the on the upside of that, there was a forest across the street from my house, and that's like, I watched TV as a kid, but wasn't really watching TV as a kid. We were constantly outside playing, like running around the fort, building cabins or whatever, you know, and that's an important thing for kids to. I feel bad for kids that are living in the city that they just don't really, aside from High Park, you know, the odd.
Oh, just our green space.
Yeah. So they don't have access really to that, unless you're really wealthy, and then you can afford to do your, you know, yearly summer trips to Algonquin or whatever.
Yeah. People with cottages
and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, but just for someone, the family that's just like just getting by in this city, you know, I feel bad for those kids. You know that. It's a different, and so that. I am. It makes me really worried about, you know, these things like deforestation, and, you know, our fish stocks in our oceans will be depleted by mid-century. You know, like
I can't imagine what that world is going to look like. I mean, I guess I can. It'll be quiet.
Blade Runner. It's right here. Yeah, that's true. This lovely thing.
It is kind of amazing that the new Blade Runner has the vision of. Have you seen the sequel yet?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, just that depleted world where people grow maggots for protein and everything is dust and misery. And
I thought it was really smart, like how they portrayed like a potential, like there's those overhead shots when he's flying into Los Angeles, and you just see those. It's just those deep caverns, which essentially are just spaces between buildings that just go, and it just as far as the eye can see, and it's, as a visual spectacle, I thought it was really, I thought it was incredible. But yeah, it is these things were, and that's when I first saw it. You know, it was a bit of an existential crisis for me. Like, oh my God, we're all doomed. And what scenes stand out for you in that film?
Blade Runner or Baraka?
Oh no, in Baraka, not Blade Runner. Yeah.
That's ambiguous.
Let's switch this up.
It's amazing because having just watched this recently, it all blurs together into sequence after sequence, which isn't a bad thing. It's just that it's hard to pick and choose.
It's hard, yeah.
Like, I don't remember the transition points. So
we were talking about reading reviews for this, and I went back and read some reviews too, and somebody some critic made a comment that it would have been much easier if they had it's like subtitled where actually each of the locations are. I'm just like, are you serious? You spend all your time.
It would be a distraction, but I get
But there should be like a version of it on the where you can just like put it so you know exactly where it is.
Yeah. Well, it's like the Frederick Wiseman's thing of never identifying people when they're speaking, which is fine in Ex Libris when you're watching, Elvis Costello at a gala event, but when it's somebody reading a book that you've never heard of before and you don't recognize the book or the speaker, therefore the author, you're just completely lost.
Yeah.
Here, he thinks it would be too disruptive. To identify everyone. That's always been his argument. It's like, it would be kind of egalitarian and everyone would be on the same footing.
Yeah. You can't expect it. That's a different scenario altogether. You need that. It also helps provide context as well. And
sure. Yeah. But in Baraka, in this sort of thing, you do drift in a way that's really interesting, but it also retroactively blurs the thing in my mind. So I'm just looking at this thing now and going, oh, that's right. California, Cambodia. It's these aren't chapters, these are just a map.
Yeah.
And then you flip it over on the back, and I think, and here we are, number 13, Chickens, easily the most memorable sequence to my mind, because it's just so non-judgmentally horrifying, if that makes any sense, to watch, and Ebert wrote about it really, really eloquently. You're just watching them have the only moment of freedom they're ever going to experience. Yeah. And it is just stunning to see it presented almost anonymously. Like you don't really see human interaction. You see people, but
it's juxtaposed. The brilliance of that scene, the sort of life cycle of battery hens, and it was juxtaposed with cities teeming with people, and at one point in this process, the beaks are cauterized. So they don't peck each other to death in their little battery hens.
It's sort of blunted.
And and Fricke, he sort of alternates these scenes with shots of crowded cities and people and stuff, and it's the implications are very clear. It's like humans have as much value in our sort of westernized society as these chickens do to industrialized farming. And even takes it further, and they care so little for these chickens. It's just like they're just, I don't know. Not that they care so little. I think you're just desensitized by it,
Yeah, well, certainly...
It's very clinical. It's just...
Yeah, the people sorting them, the people working with them have no relationship to them whatsoever.
Yeah, they push them through as quickly as possible. It's sort of like how our society just pushes people through life, and how that sequence is just phenomenal. It really stuck with me.
I mean, and I was saying earlier that the film feels ambivalent about a lot of things and doesn't seem to take positions. That one seemed pretty on the nose.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it has to be, because after all of this other stuff where you're really just watching life play itself out, you're seeing the disruption of life. These chickens don't have, very few animals can be said to have agency, but what you're seeing is this breeding process where there's absolutely nothing for them to do. There's no purpose. They're simply being made to be food.
It's a commodity. That's all it is. It's a human, it's a biological commodity.
Yeah. And that we've created this incredible organization around it. We have, and I don't mean commercial organization, I mean we have made it possible to factory farm on this scale. I'm trying to think if that was the first time I'd ever really encountered the concept. Yeah. And it's so artfully awful. The editorial technique, the framing, it's a great experience cinematically, but you're seeing this nightmarish reality that presumably has been there all along, that we were always capable of it. We just got to this point where the technology allowed it to happen, and it's just so it's so despairing and awful.
And I think the end of that sequence is I think it's a slow zoom looking through a window. I think it may be Fifth Avenue in New York.
I think you're right.
As the lights are changing in the cars, and then you just have this like increasingly this breathing sound in perfect rhythm to the, and it's that was just that sort of blew me away. It's a little literal, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it really is effective, you know?
Yeah, and because he doesn't do it that often in the
Yeah.
film, because he doesn't start grabbing a highlighter too often,
Yeah.
it really lands
Yeah.
because you're trapped with it. I mean, that's the difference between experiencing something, even in a room like this, where you can devote yourself to the image, and a movie theater where you're surrounded with other people processing the same
Yeah.
idea at once. The crowd experience, as important as the orchestra is to a live performance,
Yeah.
I think seeing a movie with an audience, seeing a documentary, a film of ideas with an audience, and feeling the room absorb an idea, like everybody's like a microsecond behind or ahead. I love that experience. And
me too.
It's so eerie and unique. I guess live theater probably does the same thing. The thing I like, though, the thing that I love about film, though, is it forces a certain perspective onto you. Yeah.
That, like, whether it's choice of lens or whatever, whereas theater is just a bit more, I don't know, and I shouldn't say that.
Well, no,
there's a lot of, but that's my preference.
Because,
It's not that I don't like to think for myself or I don't like to, but I do like, especially as a director, being able to force people into, you need to pay attention to this right now,
right.
or whatever. Yeah.
Well, cinema is about vision, right? Like it's about literally being directed to a point by the film you're watching. Whereas theater, you're just your experience of it will be different depending on whose face you can see, just what angle you're sitting in the theater. I keep thinking that Douglas Trumbull talks about the future of high frame rate as the idea of creating a window to the event that you're watching, but he never seems to, we talked about it.
High frame rate, do you mean like high speed photography? Or
120 or 240 frames a second. What he did with Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. But what he keeps missing in the conversation is that creating this windows are fixed. Like movies have perspective and the lenses change and the angles change and close-ups and mid-shots. Everything about that ruins the concept of the window because we are aware that the image is changing. If you imagine doing a high frame rate live broadcast of the National Theater that you could watch anywhere in the world from roughly the same place the camera would be sitting. Like you could experience a fixed image of a play clearly and without any distortion or lag. That seems
and without
to be,
motion blur.
That seems to be where this is going. Like that's what that could be.
I could stomach that, like a live performance where it's expected, like just to have that feeling of like hyper reality. I can't do it in film, and it's just because we're so used to seeing things at 24 frames where you do have that very subtle, just a bit of motion blur. That to me has that sort of filmic quality to it, and then anything other feels like a soap opera. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like an expensive soap opera. Or whatever.
Yeah, and it was amazing how the resolution of the image actually works against the concept of suspension of disbelief.
Yeah.
Everybody, like the actors look like they're wearing makeup when they get shot. The Humvee looks like a toy. The props look like props. A wooden fence that's painted looks fake.
It's like you're watching on television where people have like that motion setting, like a proprietary like True Motion or whatever it is based on the television manufacturer, and everything just feels fake.
It looks horrible.
Yeah, and it must be like, I imagine it's sort of akin to that. I haven't seen anything.
Yeah, that's what watching the Hobbit looked like at 60.
Yeah.
Billy Lynn looked different again because it's just it looked wrong.
Yeah.
It looked wrong in a lot of different ways. It didn't look wrong in a Best Buy demo mode kind of way.
Yeah.
But
there's just something off, I guess.
Yeah. And it's to bring it back to Baraka, it is an amazing argument for photochemical film, for resolution, for large format, because you just can't beat it. I saw this past week I saw Dunkirk in IMAX 70 and Murder on the Orient Express, which was filmed in 65.
Did they film in 65?
Yeah.
Was it shot on film? Or was it an Arri?
Photochemical 65 millimeter film. Kodak, I think, specifically, because there was a logo at the end. And we saw it in what I think was 4K. And it's gorgeous, but film is film. And any digital approximation is going to look different somehow.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And it's not to say that I'm not a purist. Like, my last film was shot on, an Arri Alexa. And I love the way it looked. We did use, older Panavision lenses, and there's an inherent soft. I think the Death Blow is the super sharp, obviously digital film with like really modern lenses that are just so sharp and just everything feels like you see every pore, and that pulls me. Like I like a bit of softness to it. You know, even shooting, like we projected Sweet Virginias, and we only did a 2K master, but even if it's projected 4K, when I guess it's being up-res, but there's still like a little bit of a softness to it that I actually prefer over just a pure 4K. That I would prefer over like finishing it in 4K just by shooting in it.
Sometimes clarity is not the best thing.
No.
Like, it's just not always the way to go. These films, you know, they need a certain... Well, haze is the wrong word, but the textures of fog and steam and smoke and all of that stuff really matters.
And not to contradict...
Just look at the water spray and think about the way that shot looked.
There is something, and again, seeing this on 70, there's something about the between the color saturation, the contrast ratio, the sharpness to it too. You know, not to contradict myself, but there's, in terms of the broader image, you know what I mean, the sharp, you can see so far back in certain depth of field, you know, and things. It's really hard to, and that's why I really recommend, if anyone hasn't seen it, and if, you know, obviously if this, I don't know when the next time this is going to come here, being projected in 70 millimeter, but the Blu-ray, because what they did was they scanned...
It's an 8K scan, right?
They did an 8K scan, so you've got like over 8,000 pixels horizontally across this image, scanning the 65 millimeter negative. Mm-hmm. And they oversampled it, so when they took each of those frames and converted it to an HD frame for the Blu-ray, it retains more detail than had they just gone and just did an HD scan of the 8K negative.
Okay.
Of the 65 millimeter negative. So it's arguably, and I'm not sure if what's his face, Tarantino did this for the Hateful Eight Blu-ray. I'm not sure, or I don't know if Christopher Nolan's done it for any of the segments that he's shot for the Batman films or whatever, or Interstellar. But it's arguably one of the best Blu-rays ever produced, because, and it took them like 3 weeks of scanning that 24 hours a day just to scan the negative, you know.
Yeah.
The Blu-ray is phenomenal. Like, it really is worth seeing. Obviously, seeing it on 70 is one thing, but just in terms of Blu-rays, it's really, really great. You just don't have all the digital banding that you would see, like, when I know they had it on Netflix a while back, and it's just like...
Yeah, there's no way that compression is going to serve that image.
Yeah.
Trumbull once told me, I guess this would have been the first time we talked, so maybe 2010 or 2011, he said he would rather watch 2001 projected on Blu-ray than 70, which I found obscene. But he said he just wanted the static image. He doesn't like judder, and that to him was the key.
Oh, because of the registration on like having the image projected.
Yeah, just even wobbling the frame. He says he sees it and it takes him out of it completely, and it offends his eye.
You only really see it in titles, though. That's like, unless you're like, you get consumed with the story, you know what I mean? Like, you see it in titles, and I like, and people try to emulate it now for...
I know, and they're lying to me.
But it's just like, just don't do it.
I saw some horror movie had tried to duplicate like a 70s camera shake with the copyright line moving. Yeah. And it's like, okay, I get what you're doing. It's a cute little retro touch. Better not do this with the end titles.
But it's a gimmick.
Yeah. You just stop it.
Yeah, just shoot it on film, that if it really, that's what you want to.
Yeah. We're in this weird place where digital has been around just long enough for a generation to grow up with it in their formative years. Yeah. And for the first time, they're kind of trying to take back celluloid, but they're misappropriating it. All the wrong things.
Yeah.
And the thing that I remember being the most aware of as a kid was watching an optical drop, when like the quality of a shot changes because there's an effect in it. Yep. And you're seeing the step down. Yep. That we don't have that anymore.
No, everything's done.
Yeah, which is great because it's all digital post. Mm-hmm. But it used to be that somebody, I can't remember, it was probably James Cameron, somebody was complaining about the optical drop because he was convinced that it taught audiences to expect a jump scare or something in that shot, because if the texture had suddenly shifted, part of your brain is like, oh, I know why this is happening, even if you're not conscious of it. And I realize I don't own the Blu-ray of Baraka, and I'm going to go buy that now.
It's one of those.
I know I've seen it.
it's worth having in
wonder
your
if I got it
in this
book.
collection here.
Exactly.
You need to have.
It's weird that I have Samsara but not Baraka. I wonder if I did have it once and then just gave it away or
MPI.
something.
It's MPI, right?
I think so. Yeah.
They released the Blu-ray as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if I can't figure out where it is, I will go get another one.
Yeah.
But the experience. Well, this is what we were saying about the theatrical experience. The experience of watching it larger than life is one thing. Watching it at home, it's the kind of experience that you really like. It's the kind of movie that demands your full attention.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if it's diminished in the memory, like the sort of the collective cinematic memory, as lesser than the Katsi films, just because it can't be shown as easily.
Yeah.
You know, unless you're bringing.
I think it's still
Blu-ray or
immersive
DCP.
though. I don't have the same sound system that I used to have 10 years ago, or 7 or 8 years ago, whenever the Blu-ray came out.
Yeah.
But I did have a really good, 46-inch plasma television and a really great sound system, and it was still immersive. Yeah, I guess they're just varying degrees,
Yeah.
We were talking about Dunkirk earlier. I saw it twice. I saw the 4K projection, and then I went to go see the 70. I didn't see it on IMAX, but I saw the 70 millimeter. And while the 70 millimeter was great in that, the sound was better. It was one of those AVX theaters with the 4K, and I always thought that. And then I saw the 70 millimeter at Varsity.
That's where I saw it the first time.
Yeah. And that room is cavernous, and it sort of reverberates a bit.
Yeah, it wasn't made for.
I found it better. I enjoyed the 4K experience, the 4K projection better because the sound was just phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, I saw it at the Cinesphere last week.
Yeah.
In
That's another level
sound system.
altogether.
That was, I gotta say, I as much as I scoff at the idea of, you have to see it this way, that film is designed to.
You have to see it this way.
Yeah, it's an assault. Like, it's designed to overwhelm you. And the
Did they
IMAX
redo all the
aspect
interior as well? Like, is it?
Yeah,
all...
it's clean. It's new. This is going to drop. In fact, when this episode launches, it will still be playing there because it's there Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights through November.
Wow. Okay,
so
cool.
Go.
Yeah, I just want to go and see that room.
It is. Yeah, it's really nice.
I've never seen a film there, even when it was open.
Really?
Yeah.
New chairs, new sound.
Wow.
They've doubled the sound channels from 6 to 12, although I don't know how many speakers are involved.
Yeah.
It's clean. It's nice. It's the nicest I've seen it in 20 years.
Cool.
And Dunkirk. Yeah, Dunkirk in IMAX 70 is the aspect ratio is like 1:4:4 for most of the film.
Yeah.
As opposed to the 70 mil, which was 2.2.
Yeah.
And I guess the AVX is like what, 180 something. It's. I know it's taller than the 70, but not as tall as IMAX.
I can't say. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm trying to.
It's probably consistent with the 65 millimeters, so maybe one.
I think my ears were bleeding, and I was just focusing on that.
Oh no, it was an incredible experience, and that, like, what people are doing with large format now is really remarkable, because we finally reached a point where the technology allows you to make the movie you want to make just with bigger film.
Yeah.
But as a documentary environment, it's sort of falling away because IMAX has taken over that completely. There are no narrative documentaries anymore being shot this way, the way that Baraka was, the way that I've already repeatedly called it non-narrative. It is a film with a point of view, and maybe the last one. I mean, really, of its kind.
I don't see. Well, see, there are films that, and not to compare the two because they're very like the BBC Natural History stuff that they do, like Planet Earth and all that sort of stuff. But they're different. There's still an enormous amount of work goes into those films, and they are beautiful to look at. But the point of view from Baraka is it's really its own entity, and I think that's probably the last of its kind. Shot like that, and introducing the world to at least from a visual standpoint, to something that they really haven't seen up to that point.
Yeah,
I don't think that happen again, because it's not to say that we've seen it all, you know what I mean, but I think now as we move forward, it's all about different ways to experience something rather than like, oh, how did they get that shot, you know? Like
yeah.
It's different now. That's the next level, is, you know, probably like VR, you know, where you're completely, once VR gets to that point where it's photorealistic and you can immerse yourself in an environment and really experience it in 360 degrees, you know, all around you, you know, that'll be like the next like step up for something like that, I think.
Yeah, I've seen some impressive VR stuff in terms of like representational documentary, but it always feels like with the narrative pieces that they're trying to push you into action. It's like they use game mechanics more than narration or narrative drives, and I just find myself resisting that somehow.
Well, it's more like, look what we can do, instead of just allowing the story to.
Everything's a demo.
Yeah,
there's no.
Which is great with that, and I guess that's just part of like when a new to technology is being, you know, introduced to the world. You know, it's all about look what we can do.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't know if it's necessarily the best way to tell a story. And it's the same thing for 3D as well. It becomes like a gimmick. Although the one 3D film that I really want to see, and I missed it when it was here years ago, was the Herzog.
I knew you were going to say
Cave of Forgotten Dreams.
Yeah, that does work.
Is that IFC in New York the other day, the big poster, and I for some reason just forgot about it, and I was like, oh man, I got to see that. Like, I hope that somebody brings that back, because that's something I'd like to see in 3D. Did you see it?
I did. Yeah. I saw the TIFF in 3D, and it is, you know, it's more interesting as a walkthrough of this space than it is like the questions he tries to raise are not that interesting. Yeah. I just wanted to go back and look at the cave. Oh, really? And as that, since, you know, since it's physically no longer possible to go there, because the space is too delicate to withstand much more human visitation. Yeah. This is the only way I'll ever experience it, unless there's a VR version. Yeah. But and that is beautiful, because you're just seeing this thing, and the 3D process makes it a little darker, which actually works for the cave, because it feels like a secret. It feels like something you're not supposed to be experiencing. Yeah. That was amazing. But in terms of 3D documentary, I can't, you know, other than maybe spending an hour just sort of drifting through a veldt somewhere. Yeah. But again, there's no beyond what you see, and I assume it's just so expensive to mount something like that people won't bother unless they know they can follow this one.
Yeah, like with that OJ, that documentary, that Ezra, what's his last name? Yeah, that he did. Would that have been better in 3D? It's like, no.
Maybe for the crime photographs.
Yeah, maybe.
Just to give you the sense of it, but that's where VR
technology to go through that.
Exactly.
Sort of
pawing through the. Like, imagine a serial in VR, like that kind of killer app for that format.
Did you listen to Dirty John?
No.
Oh, we'll talk about that after.
Okay. But yeah, so this really does organically kind of bring us to the final question of the podcast, which is always, you know, like, what, if anything, of Baraka have you borrowed or absorbed or stolen or, you know,
for my own work
into your own work? Yeah.
Nothing. Like, it just an appreciation for large format photography, and but that's what I started the podcast by saying, like, it's really, this film, it's more about the impact that it's had on me as a person than about influencing my work.
But surely that's, you know, it's the same thing ultimately, like your perspective.
I guess so. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Well, I always think, like, technically, like, how is this affecting? Like, am I going to steal this shot or something like that, or this technique? From that point of view, no, not at all.
I was trying to make the argument in my head that the rodeo flashbacks at the beginning and end of Sweet Virginia are somehow the juxtaposition.
The high-speed photography. Yeah, here's the thing with high-speed photography. And this is the last thing. Not to go too far off the topic, but I think it's the magic of. It's become so ubiquitous. It was a different when you had to use like a Photosonics camera. I don't know if you're familiar with Photosonics. Their cameras were designed. They designed head-up displays for aircraft, but they also made 35, 65 millimeter, and 16 millimeter cameras for the U.S. military to shoot missile tests and all that sort of stuff. Okay. So they had like all this. There's a scene in, I think, in Snatch is when Brad Pitt's punched and you see him come in and it's at a high speed. And that was all 35. That was like I think it was a Photosonics Action Master.
Okay.
And I did this Broken Social Scene video that was 16 millimeter Photosonics, and you had to, no video tap or anything like that. And you have to pull the mag off and you have to look through and the image is flipped upside down. But as soon as you put the mag back on, it's like you're shooting blind.
Okay.
You know, it's amazing. And you hear the sound of the camera too. It's like why it's so fast. You know, the last thing you want is a camera jam there. And then I feel bad for any camera assistant that's ever had to deal with that, because film just moves so fast through it. It was something really special to try and get stuff like that slow motion, but it's now with like phantom cameras, like God, you can shoot high speed, well, not as high speed, but you can like on your iPhone, you know. Yeah. It sort of lost its magic, you know. If anything, I just thought that I wanted to draw out those sequences and just make them feel dreamlike, and that was the reason why we shot a little bit of a higher frame rate. But yeah, I don't know. It hasn't really. I think I can separate my own opinions about, because it's affected me in a way that in how I sort of view the world and culture, and the films that at least this last one anyway, is very sort of separate from that. Like I don't know how much that would have influenced me in making Sweet Virginia, but still, nonetheless, I still love going back and watching it.
Yeah. I mean, certainly letting the film change you, or having had the film change you, that's enough.
That's enough. That's more than most films. The effect that has on you is greater than most films that I've ever seen. So
yeah. I mean, God, I would have had Fricke sign the Koyaanisqatsi Blu-ray if I'd met him.
Yeah. Well, next time I go to LA, I thought about going, now that I want to get in touch with them, just to go by and say hi, and I'm not sure they would be open to that, but I would like to just at least try anyway.
Oh yeah. Buy him a drink if nothing else.
Yeah. I think if I ever do, I'll get your copy for you.
I honestly believe that, like, literally the least we owe the people, the artists who genuinely change us, is that kind of thank you.
Absolutely.
And they're probably tired of it.
Yeah.
But, you know,
that's too bad.
You have to try.
Yeah.
My thanks to Jamie Dagg, whose new film Sweet Virginia is in theaters and on VOD in the US right now from IFC Films, and Elevation Pictures is releasing it in Canada next Friday, December 1st. It's very good, and you should check it out. I'll even go so far as to say it's a better showcase for John Bernthal than The Punisher. Don't at me. Jamie's not on Twitter, but you can find him on Instagram at Jamie M. Dagg, all one word, JAMIEMDAGG. You can find Baraka on Blu-ray and DVD from MPI Home Video in that gorgeous 8K scan we were talking about earlier. It's also available on iTunes and Google Play, but honestly, why would you want to watch that in anything other than true HD? As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and elsewhere on the internet at nowtoronto.com. You can also find this podcast on Twitter at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. If you'd like to leave a review up on iTunes or Apple Podcasts or wherever, that would be greatly appreciated, especially since there's someone else out there biting my bit. Thanks for listening.
I'm afraid you're just too darn loud.